Chapter 4, Tissues, Part 2. So there are four basic types of connective tissue. We have connective tissue proper, which is a very important kind of tissue. It makes up things like our ligaments and tendons. We have cartilage. Cartilage is a big category. We have bone tissue and blood. That's right, blood is a type of tissue. So, characteristics common to tissues. Well, there are usually fewer cells, and these cells are kind of spread out. They're not all clumped together, which means, of course, that means there's lots of extracellular material. So lots of material found between those spread out cells. This includes the ground substance, which is sort of the bulk background material, and protein fibers. Protein fibers, long, thin protein structures stretching throughout the connective tissue. Most connective tissues are vascularized, so most connective tissues possess blood vessels. There's a variety of possible cells found in connective tissues. Many connective tissues have what are called fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are the cells that make the extracellular material in connective tissue proper. So connective tissue proper has fibroblasts producing the ground substance and the protein fibers. Chondroblasts, on the other hand, are the cells found in cartilage, and chondroblasts are the cells in cartilage that make the extracellular matrix. And then in osteoblasts, osteoblasts are found in bone tissue. So osteoblasts make up the extracellular material in bone tissue. Again, extracellular matrix is the ground substance and any protein fibers. Adipose tissue, which is a proper connective tissue, actually is made up of cells called adipose cells. Adipose cells store fats. And then, of course, blood cells. Blood has lots of different kinds of cells. It has the white blood cells for the immune response, red blood cells for carrying oxygen, platelets for blood clotting. For the connective tissues with protein fibers, there are three main kinds of protein fibers. You have collagen fibers. Collagen fibers, long, thick fibers that are able to resist pulling forces. So they're able to resist forces pulling on the tissue, helps to keep the tissue held together. And collagen fibers are the most common type. Then there's reticular fibers. Reticular fibers are thinner and they sort of branch off, forming a mesh. So reticular fibers can cover structures, can act as a supporting structure within a tissue, and it forms, again, a mesh-like network. And then finally, there's elastic fibers. Elastic fibers are thinner and also branch, but they don't form meshes per se. The main function of elastic fibers are to allow the structure, the tissue, to stretch and then return to the original shape. So you can, for instance, stretch your skin a little bit and it will return to its original shape because of the elastic fibers found in it. Ground substance. Again, ground substance fills in the spaces around the cells between the protein fibers, and usually it's a gel-like substance with lots of water associated with it. So it's gelatinous, it's got a lot of water in it, lots of things dissolved in it, helps keep the cells moist and alive. All right, first up, connective tissue proper, we have areolar connective tissue. Areolar connective tissue, see this has all three different kinds of protein fibers. So these little lines here represent some of the protein fibers. So it has the elastic fibers, collagen fibers, and reticular fibers. And the main cells found in areolar connective tissue are fibroblasts and macrophages. So these dark spots here are the nucleuses of fibroblasts. And all the cells are scattered out widely. The protein fibers don't go any particular orientation. The functions of areolar connective tissue is to wrap around and cushion organs. So they give organs cushion to protect them, helps to support the organs, and also it's a very moist tissue, so it holds and conveys fluids between tissues. Areolar connective tissue is very widely distributed, found all throughout the body, including often under epithelial tissue and around many, many organs. Adipose tissue. Adipose tissue also has all three protein fibers, but they're very sparse. So you can't really see them in this slide. They have only one kind of cell, and that is the adipose cells, which are closely packed together and look empty because inside is where we would find the lipids, the fatty material, and under a microscope that just doesn't really show up. So the function of adipose tissue is to act as an energy reserve, a place to store energy, store fat, and also it can support and protect organs. For instance, it supports and surrounds kidneys to protect them if you get a blow to the lower back. Places you can find adipose tissue include under the skin, as well as in the abdomen and in the breasts. Dense regular connective tissue, as we see here, has lots and lots of collagen fibers. So all this sort of pinkish material, those are all collagen fibers densely packed together, all going in the same direction, in the same orientation. And the collagen fibers give the dense regular connective tissue its strength to resist forces. And places where you can find it is in the tendons that attach muscles to bone and in the ligaments that attach bone to bone. Dense irregular connective tissue, on the other hand, has lots of collagen fibers bundled up, but now they're going in all different kinds of directions. So dense irregular connective tissue, the collagen bundles of collagen fibers are going in all kinds of directions, able to resist tension, resist forces in many directions. You can find fibroblasts. These are nucleuses of fibroblasts within dense irregular connective tissue. And its location is in the fibrous capsules around organs and around joints and in the dermis of the skin. Our skin is a pretty tough organ. Moving on to cartilages. Cartilages are, example here is hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is avascular, does not have blood vessels. You can see vaguely there's a little bit of collagen fibers. You can't really see them that well. They're spread out. And there's little spaces called lacuna. In each lacuna, you'll find a chondrocyte or cartilage cell. And the functions of cartilage include supporting and reinforcing structures, resisting compression, so that, for instance, the intervertebral discs in your vertebral column are all different kinds of, actually fibrocartilage is what makes up your intervertebral discs, sorry. So you can find it in the embryoskeleton and at the ends of the long bones. So at the ends of the long bones, it helps to resist compression at the joints formed at the ends of the long bones. Elastic cartilage again has these spaces, lacuna with chondrocytes in them. Here you can actually see the fibers. In elastic cartilage, you have elastic fibers. And elastic cartilage helps to maintain the shape of a structure. For example, you can find this in the external ear. The harder, more rigid part of your external ear is made up of elastic cartilage. And again, avascular, no blood vessels. Then fibrocartilage, lots of collagen fibers bundled up. You can kind of see them as these pinkish little bundles. Again, you have lacuna. Within the lacuna, you'll find chondrocytes. The cells of the cartilage. Fibrocartilage also is involved in absorbing compressive shock. Again, in this case, the intervertebral discs and the discs in the knee are made of fibrocartilage. So if you sit down really hard, your vertebra don't clack together. Instead, the fibrocartilage discs will compress to a degree and absorb some of that force. Moving on to bone tissue. Bone tissue, as seen here, is very interesting looking tissue. It is very hard. So bone tissue is a solid tissue. It is calcified, has lots of calcium within it. And collagen fibers. Can't see them, but there are lots of collagen fibers in bone tissue. There are these dark little spots. These are little spaces. These spaces, again, are called lacuna for one, lacunae for multiples. And the lacuna is where you'll find the osteocytes. So the bone cells are in the lacuna. Bone tissue is very vascular. Blood vessels found in the central canals of the bone tissue. And bone tissue helps to support and protect organs. So the skull protects the brain. Bone tissue stores calcium, also can store fats in the yellow bone marrow. And all blood cells are formed in bone tissue, in the red bone marrow. Surprise, surprise, bone tissue is found in our bones. And then finally, the blood tissue. Blood tissue is a liquid tissue, a fluid. It has no protein fibers and has lots of kinds of blood cells, red blood cells, the main kind, also white blood cells, platelets. And blood's job is to transport materials, to move nutrients throughout the body, to move waste, to move heat, move oxygen and carbon dioxide. And blood is found within blood vessels and within the chambers of the heart. Muscle tissue. Muscle tissue includes skeletal muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, smooth muscle tissue. And these tissues contract, that is, get shorter, and this generates a force. This force often allows for some kind of movement and also can help generate heat. So, skeletal muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle tissue is made up of extremely long columnar cells, cylindrical cells, extremely long. They have this obvious dark light pattern that's referred to as striations. So obvious dark light, dark light, dark light striations along the length of the skeletal muscle cells. And there are multiple nucleuses per cell. So boom, 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 boom. Here are a bunch of nucleuses all found in one cell. Skeletal muscle tissue is voluntarily controlled, allowing us to consciously allow for movements to occur. And it's these skeletal muscles that let us move our bones that are made of skeletal muscle tissue. Then you have cardiac muscle tissue. Cardiac muscle tissue, the cells are much shorter and they can branch. However, cardiac muscle tissue does still possess striations. You can kind of see the dark light banding pattern. There's only one nucleus per cell, so each cardiac muscle cell is one nucleus. Between neighboring cardiac muscle cells is a dark, dense structure called an intercalated disc. This is made up of protein structures like the desmosomes that help to connect the neighboring cells to each other. Function of cardiac muscle tissue is to contract to move blood throughout the body. Our heart is involuntarily controlled. We do not have to think about making it contract. And the cardiac muscle tissue is found in the walls of the heart. Smooth muscle tissue. Smooth muscle tissue is made up of short, spindle-shaped cells. These cells have one nucleus per cell, and there is no striation. It's smooth muscle tissue because there's no striation. Smooth muscle tissue is found in the walls of most hollow organs like the stomach, the intestine, the blood vessels, and they propel materials, propel substances along the internal structure. And this is all involuntarily controlled. We don't have to think about it happening. And finally, nervous tissue. Nervous tissue's main cell are these large cells called neurons. And neurons function to transmit electrical signals from one neuron to the next, to the brain, within the brain, and from the brain to structures in the body. And this is all to allow us to control functions of the body. And again, nervous tissue is found in the brain and spinal cord. All right, sometimes we get cut. When we get cut, we will bleed. So the initial stage of getting an injury is bleeding and pain. The blood vessels that are damaged will release the blood and we'll feel pain. The damaged cells will release chemicals. These chemicals will cause inflammation. Inflammation is an increased blood flow to the area of the injury. This allows for increased arrival of white blood cells. White blood cells will fight any pathogens that enter the body at that injured site. And symptoms of inflammation include heat, redness, swelling, and pain. To stop the loss of blood, the blood will form blood clots. Blood clots will block the area, become a dense structure that blocks the area, and then dries to form the scab on top of the injury. After a while, the tissues that were damaged will begin to regenerate. Fibroblasts will produce more extracellular matrix. Epithelial cells will divide and fill in that space. Blood vessels will start to reform. Macrophages will arrive to remove cell debris. And then in the final stage, the tissue will fully reform. If it's a minor injury, we will get complete healing. If it is a major injury, we will have scars. Scars are called fibroses. And scar tissue is never as good as the original tissue. And of course, finally, the scab falls off. That is it for this lecture.